seconds, and you can start.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. My name is Cornel Hengsenfu. I'm hoping we're recording and everyone is present because I'm not 100% sure, but everyone tells me it's fine. So welcome to today's session. Today's session is on community resilience on climate change. And the whole idea about it is that climate change has a variety of negative effects on society and the way we live, and can really start exacerbating some of the effects and the current difficulties that many communities face. So today we're going to look at how we can tackle and how different ways it can be tackled, and how it can also have a direct benefit on communities, the economics and the social side of communities. So today is really a talk about the importance of collaborative processes in building community resilience to climate change throughout European cities. And our speakers today are both mostly based in the UK and in Glasgow, but there are connections to other cities around Europe and how these case studies might apply to them. So the way today is going to run is we're going to have a series of mini TED Talks by Fraser Stewart, myself, and Dr. Renuka Thakur. After these talks will be followed by a Q&A, and the topic of these talks will be about all these speakers' different perspectives and initiatives on building climate resilience against climate change and their personal experiences on this and their work. So without further ado, we have our first speaker, who is Fraser Stewart. Now, Fraser is an applied energy policy researcher at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, making local energy innovations work actively against poverty and inequality in developed countries. In addition to this research, Fraser is on the board of Glasgow Community Energy, and he successfully installed Glasgow's first cooperative energy project earlier this year, with lessons for communities and cities across Europe in particular. And we'll watch that small TED Talk video by Fraser now.
I'm Fraser, and I'm one of the board of directors for Glasgow Community Energy. Glasgow Community Energy is a community energy cooperative in Glasgow that uses community-owned solar panels to provide clean electricity to local buildings and creates new income for community projects and initiatives in the process. As of this year, we have solar panels installed on the roofs of 2 schools in Glasgow in areas of high deprivation. The panels provide clean power to the schools and around £5,000 to £10,000 per year in community benefit by selling excess electricity to the national grid. That money is then used to help tackle fuel poverty in the local area, to support green initiatives, and to help stimulate new social and economic activities. We're motivated at Glasgow Community Energy by 2 key things. Number 1, addressing the climate emergency. Number 2, in a way that can also bring power and resource into the hands of local communities. Using community solar panels then, we not only help to provide clean energy and money into low-income areas that desperately need it, but we fight to bring power back into those areas and people in more ways than one. Climate justice is central to the Glasgow Community Energy mission. At the heart of the project is a desire to address social and economic inequalities, to bring low-income communities and marginalised people that are typically excluded from the Glasgow and the wider climate conversation, the communities in our city that are most affected by the adverse impacts of climate and wider social injustices, by supporting those communities that we also live and work in to have ownership over those issues and to capitalise on the wider benefits that community energy and the bigger transition away from fossil fuels presents. Getting our 2 Glasgow Community Energy projects up and running was no small thing. It took a lot of planning, coordination with policymakers and engineers and architects and bureaucrats of every kind, huge amounts of community outreach and engagement and empathy, overcoming a ton of red tape and hundreds upon hundreds of volunteer hours. Starting a community energy project, in most places to be fair, that is genuinely just and inclusive and successful and sustainable, takes what we in Glasgow would call a brass neck, That is the complete determination of people who do this because they believe in those principles, battling against a highly unjust system. As members of the board who have stable day jobs working in and around community energy, we were lucky to have the time, financial security and bandwidth to give up our evenings and our weekends and holidays to make this happen. For people in precarious employment or stretched by the pressures of poverty and injustice, this isn't so easy, and so getting people from those most marginalised groups in the communities that we work in into our higher level decision making spaces, onto the project, fully on board, has always been quite a difficult and tricky thing to do consistently, especially since we operate effectively without a staff budget, which means that we can't pay the people who need it the most to really give time and energy to this kind of thing, no matter how supportive they are of the project overall. So this brings me then to the final key message for delegates and practitioners and leaders as they design their national climate action plans. There is power in community everywhere, in Glasgow and around the world too. Communities and the activists who live and work in them can lead if governments are willing to listen and support them to do so. If we want to combat the climate crisis in a way that addresses those injustices in Glasgow or anywhere else in the world, then we need to embed justice principles into our decision-making process and spaces and provide the resources for people from those communities who want to act to be able to do so. So provide dedicated support to groups working in marginalised communities. Listen to people from those communities who invariably feel the sharpest impact of the climate crisis in your country, in your city, in your town and in your village. Hire them into decision-making spaces. Support them and the activists and volunteers who spend years of their lives trying to make things better by providing them with the funding, incentives, forums and resources necessary to act. Nobody knows those frontline communities and their needs better than those people. Nobody is better placed to seize those opportunities or challenge those injustices, but they cannot do it without dedicated policy and financial support. By doing this, by supporting those communities properly, and of course doing what needs to be done on the bigger scale at national level and challenging the wider destructive forces that drive the climate crisis, we can address the climate crisis in a way that recognises and directly challenges those injustices at the most fundamental human and local level. With something like community energy, that can mean power to people in more ways than one. So I'm Fraser, and
Thank you for that, Fraser, for that video and for telling us about your community energy project and what that means to the communities on the ground and what that really needs from the future from policy writers. Now, next will be a video from myself, Cornell Hengsenfu, and of course, awkwardly, I have to introduce myself. So again, I'm Cornell. I worked throughout my career as a climate change and environmental scientist, a communicator, working in policy and as a community organizer. I currently work as the climate change lead and the environmental lead at Semvo Scotland, which is an intermediary organisation that works between the Scottish Government and through grassroots organisations on the ground, supporting ethnic minority volunteer sector. I also coordinate the Ethnic Minority Environmental Network, looking to champion climate action and justice throughout all ethnic minority communities. Now, we have this next video, and I want to remind everyone that we have a Q&A session with the speakers in the panel. So make sure you think of your questions as we go through these videos and save them for the end. Back in 2012, there was a meeting on climate action. This would have included members from different environmental NGOs, public bodies, and businesses. One of the people who attended that meeting was someone called Zarina Ahmed. Now, she was the only person of color in the room, and this became obvious to everyone there. People started asking, oh, people of color are actually engaged on this issue and want to be engaged. And today I can tell you that is definitely the case. Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups have a greater level of participation in climate action activities and have a stronger belief in government action. But that wasn't the case back then. This is why Zarina created the Ethnic Minority Environmental Network, which is now facilitated by Semvo Scotland, which is a national intermediary organisation and strategic partner of the Scottish Government, with the aim of building the capacity of ethnic minority voluntary sector and its communities. Scotland and Glasgow, the most populous city in Scotland, saw the non-white ethnic population increase fourfold between 1991 and 2011. The new projections suggest that by 2031, around 20% of Glasgow's total population and 25% of children will belong to a non-white minority group. To tackle climate change, it is essential that we engage these groups that are generally underrepresented in all matter of life. The environmental sector is the second least diverse sector in all of Britain, second behind agriculture. So to create a space where people from ethnic minority backgrounds who wanted to engage with climate change and wanted to be there on the decision-making table, we created the Ethnic Minority Environmental Network. Now, this network builds capacity among ethnic minority groups to come together to raise awareness of climate issues, develop a vision of low-carbon society, have a coherent voice on climate change and climate justice, and participate in discussion with decision makers. We've been working with diverse and marginalised communities across Scotland over the last 8 years, and this network has developed a key role in ensuring that marginalised communities are included in local community climate action through partnerships with the Scottish Government, as well as contributing to policy and decision making through community consultations and representation on stakeholder working groups. The Ethnic Minority Environmental Network has over the years highlighted the need to consider climate justice both nationally and globally. Many of the member groups have links to other parts of the world where the impact of climate change is much more devastating, and these stories have been brought back to Scotland, and as a result, communities see the urgency of climate action. The Ethnic Minority Environmental Network has provided things like training on climate literacy and climate leadership, provided resources, networking, engagement opportunities to ensure that these groups have an active role in participation in climate action, whereas historically these diverse marginalised communities have been excluded. One of the actions we helped our ethnic minority groups in climate action was when we partnered up with the Scottish Government on their Climate Challenge Fund. This fund was designed to help local groups around Scotland create local climate action in their communities. This could be anything from food reduction, growing food in their own areas, methods of energy efficiency, and low carbon travel. Unfortunately, when this first came to, no ethnic minority groups were successful. Through our partnership, though, we were able to ensure the successful grant of projects of up to 150 ethnic minority projects, which ended up being a total amount of £15 million. This ensured that ethnic minority groups all around Scotland were properly engaged, and those groups who were originally of grassroots organisations who worked in areas of community development, welfare, and other areas were now equipped to start tackling climate change within their own communities. So to tackle climate justice in Scotland, what we are doing is we're trying to build the capacity of the diaspora communities who are here in Scotland and make sure that they're skilled up, they're trained up, they have the network opportunities, they have the engagement opportunities with decision makers and other bodies to have a real effect on climate change and the decisions that are being made around climate change in Scotland. Fantastic. And for our final speaker, we will have Dr. Renuka Thakor. Dr. Renuka is a sustainability expert, having comprehensive experience across businesses and academia. As a founder of the Global Sustainable Futures Progress Through Partnerships Network, or GSFN, she challenges current and future leaders to shape a creative, just, and sustainable world, honoring Sustainable Development Goals 2030 and beyond. She has built strong delivery teams on international programs to enhance understanding of learning, leadership, and organizational change. She connects the Global South and Global North through her innovative, transparent, inclusive, and transdisciplinary global digital research intensive platform. We'll have her third video now. Might just be having a little bit of a delay, so oh, we're good.
Despite very significant development gains globally, which has raised many millions of people out of absolute poverty, there is substantial evidence that inequality between the world's richest and poorest countries is widening. Today, the world has become more complex, and poorer countries have experienced significant economic and social development. However, the inequalities within countries have also been growing, and some commentators now talk of a global north and global south, referring respectively to richer and poorer communities which are found within and between countries. There are many causes of these inequalities, including the availability of natural resources, different levels of health and education, the nature of country's economy and its industrial sectors, international trading policies and access to markets, how countries are governed and international relationships between countries, conflict within and between countries, and a country's vulnerability to natural hazards and climate change. So most importantly, researchers are called upon to address the barriers to climate science in the Global South. These culturally diverse nations of Global South are united by common threats to their sustainable futures. Challenges faced in creating collaborations, partnerships across national borders and academic disciplines. Through Global Sustainable Futures Progress Through Partnership Network, we want to play a leading role in creating an inclusive, collaborative, innovative, and engaging platform for early career researchers and like-targeted stakeholders, including startups and entrepreneurs, supported by experienced senior researchers and business leaders, where everyone can share in their research, innovation, visualization, and enthusiasm in parallel to network success. Our fundamental objective is to create a strong research environment, building to a multidisciplinary and multisectoral team of endogenous professionals that would be capable of pursuing and utilizing participatory and integrative approaches in solving public and environmental sustainability problems. Therefore, our priorities are empowering and capacity building, working with researchers to empower communities and individuals, increase independence and support to those who need it, give researchers and stakeholders the legacy of sustainable practices, fair and inclusive, improve economic and social and environmental equality, pursuing development which offers fair distribution and access to good quality life and working conditions. Networking and engagement provide an innovative and global-wide platform to make global sustainable futures progress through partnership network, an effective and well-connected network transforming traditional society systems to more sustainable systems. And above all, it is sustainability. So, co-create sustainable and resilient development pathways to secure sustainable futures for all and everyone. So, the key focus is mobilization and engagement, building a community of practice, creating a strong leadership, and producing a critical mass of good practices. 800 coordinators from 105 countries have joined me. So I also call upon you to join us and co-create sustainable futures together.
Thank you, Dr. Renuka, for that video. And thank you, Fraser. And thank you, everyone, for watching. And now we're moving on to the Q&A part. So we have Fraser and Dr. Renuka here. And as we get those questions in, I just wanted to say that from these talks, I think everyone can see how broad and how varied and diverse different actions on climate change to keep communities resilient has been, both internationally and through local communities and nationally throughout Scotland, as we've seen as well. And that each one of these talks had collaboration as a core component of these projects. And I think that is a real key factor when you're talking about community resilience throughout climate change and making sure that these people are empowered and are given the resources to tackle climate change. So I'm just going to see, we've got our first question in. So Fraser, either myself, Fraser, or Dr. Renuka, put our hand up if we feel like we're ready to answer it. This question is, what are the major challenges in implementing the community-based projects? I feel like, Fraser, would like to start? I think yours is a very good example of that.
Yeah, I wanted to give other people the chance. This is always just annoying me every single day. So I think it depends on where you are, first and foremost, right? There'll be different things. There's our experience in Glasgow and in Scotland generally. I'm actually originally from a different bit of Scotland. Our experience will differ in other places, but generally the things that we find here and experience from the literature and other similar projects across Europe are, the first thing being that it requires a ton of volunteer time. A lot of the time, generally speaking, community organisers, community activist groups do things on a shoestring budget, if any budget at all, in the vast majority of cases. So the funding just isn't there to support communities who do want to do work. But within, again, sort of like post-2008, 2009, after the financial crash, in Europe, certainly with kind of the added pressures of austerity on top of everything, that then creates a bit of a divide where you have an inequality between the types of communities that can act, that can do things and have those resources already. But it also layers in this additional thing where funding that used to go to communities is being stripped back, and communities are almost being asked to plug the gaps of government with even less resources than they had before. So a very long way of saying resources is the big one. There's a lot of red tape to this as well, but also we don't do enough, in my experience, to promote the kinds of things that communities not necessarily could be doing, but the opportunities for different projects or different funding that is available. So a lot of the work, the vast majority of the work that I do is in lower income communities of high deprivation, like communities like the ones that I'm from personally. And the idea that you could have a community energy project in, say, the schemes in Dundee that I'm from is completely alien, because it's never been pitched as a feasible thing. You think of maybe solar or wind or general green things as being the purview of the leafy middle classes. But actually, there's a lot of scope for a lot of action and a lot of support and a lot of opportunity, socially, economically, as well as environmentally, if we're willing to promote it a little bit more, put a bit more resource into community groups that are already there and support those communities themselves, similar to a lot of the work that you do, Cornell, to actually bring them into the spaces to make decisions, to design those policies, to design projects themselves too. So I think those are the big ones, the kind of the resource barrier, but also there's a big divide and a big exclusion there as well.
Thanks, Fraser. I definitely have a lot to add onto that as well, but I was wondering, Dr. Anuka, do you have anything to add in your perspective or your experiences?
Thank you very much. And can you just repeat the question to make sure
Yeah.
I'm picking up the right thing?
So the question was, what are the challenges in implementing community-based projects?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I think the challenges are to create awareness, to attract people to engage with these things. And that is what I think Fraser also mentioned. I think we have to do our hard work to make them understand and engage with any project. But not only project, we must first educate them. And that is the main challenge again, that if they are not aware of these issues, they won't get engaged. And therefore, I think the priority lies that we have to get engaged. So that's all I will add here. We can go forward with any other question.
Thanks. The only thing I would add to that is probably an example from my experience of work where there is a energy initiative, and Fraser, you probably know about the CARES initiative run by Local Energy Scotland. So this is basically an initiative that provides capacity, support, and advice, and some funding as well for community centres and other owned community buildings to basically put in either solar panels or any other energy efficient technology. And this would also end up helping their bills through the winter season when it's the worst. And many of these buildings are quite old and do not hold heat in very well. So there is a level of fuel poverty that's included in this. And as effective as this program is, there is a level that needs to be done. And this is where we've been working with Local Energy the Local Energy Trust, is where they need to start engaging communities who feel the most effect of fuel poverty and who don't understand that this opportunity is there for them, but two, what that actually means for themselves economically, for their buildings, and what that does as a contribution to climate change. So a lot of people, this is their entry point into their action towards climate change. So they start with this thing, and then if there's that engagement there, and there's that capacity building with these communities, then you can start going on to other projects, such as community food growing projects, making sure that their food supply network is more stable between local communities rather than having to rely on just supermarkets and long food supply chains, things like that.
Can I add in a little bit on that? I'm so glad I could do CARES all day as well. So things like CARES, and now there are versions of this in lots of different countries as well. I know Spain are big on kind of community cooperative energy just now, really jumping on the bandwagon. Germany, the Nordics have always been huge for this too. But things like CARES and things like setting up community energy, even if it is just energy efficiency, like, little insulation, double glazed, little things in your home, there's actually quite a significant legal process behind it too. Lots of boxes that you have to tick on health and safety, regulations, all these different things that actually are super inaccessible unless you have a group like CARES or Glasgow Community Energy, Local Energy Scotland, or whoever that is in your country, in your area, supporting you to do that. It can also cost quite a lot of money. So you have examples of one of my favorite projects in the world just now is the Carbon Co-op, who are raising in the region of £500,000 in Manchester just now to effectively retrofit low-income houses, but also hire local people and train local people to create new jobs to do that. So you have this very circular local economy emerging, built out of a community group who have gone, you know what, we're not getting any support that we need here to do these things. We'll take it on, and we will reduce bills for people. We will make people, healthier, improve mental health, reduce financial stress, all that kind of good stuff. But again, it's ambitious, it's amazing, but it's plugging a gap that's, whether that's a gap in knowledge or expertise or resource, that they shouldn't really need to. If you had a bit more, I think, like you were saying, Cornell, and you as well, Dr. Thakur, if you link people together, engage people a bit better with this from the inception of the policy and the support that you're trying to give to make communities more resilient, then you can make something much more effective, much more efficient, and much more impactful in the longer term.
Thanks so much, everyone. So we'll move on to our next question. which I hope we'll have just as much as in-depth discussion. It's what are some lessons that you guys have learnt from implementing community resilience projects that others in Europe can apply in their own communities? And that's a very good question, because I feel like many of these things that we do is very applicable in every other city around Europe. Dr. Thakur, did you have anything that you wanted to say on that one?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cornel. I think the recent example of COVID-19 teaches us so much that we can build on this, and how EU can, or maybe any other country or worldwide, we can apply, see how we can recover for climate change, or address this climate change. I think, first of all, we must stop spreading rumors. We must be science-based. And that is what I think IPCC report has done a lot for us. And we must be preaching that in a simple language to each and every people. I think rumors must be stopped. The myths around this climate change that, because people immediately experience their weather changes every time, they think that, it is going to change. It's not going to be a long-term impact. And we know that it is long-term impact, and that message should be enforced to everyone. And also this COVID taught us that we can do a collective approach, collective action to, and I think that was a very good example here in COVID, that we all collectively got together, though we had many, many fouls in those things. However, it was so at some level, we did a collective action, and that helped us to address this COVID. And likewise, I think there is a need to have a collective action at different levels, different communities, different sectors. However, it may be different at different levels, but however, there should be a collective approach here. And travel is, again, I think it is depending on our individual as well as at organizational level. And there are several policies also on travel nowadays. And I think that can take a leadership in sectors to give us clean air at least, and stop pollution somewhat. We know that electric batteries and other things do have some disadvantages, but I think the technology will help us soon move towards better efficiency of those technologies. And green jobs, which you all both have mentioned already. I think when we stuck with this COVID-19, we immediately moved to other alternatives which were possible for us to do, from like working from home, got used to our IT system, or many of them, I think we have these cases of moving out to different jobs, learning different skills and so on. And that is what we need. I think we must be going away from what we have been doing and unlearn some of the unsustainable learnings which we have already done from several years, and we must be learning. We must be looking forward to learn new things which could be more sustainable. I don't say that will be sustainable, but which could be more sustainable. And also a mass shift on recovery, like on our climate change, and rethinking our processes, reinventing things which we have been doing from years and years and ages, and repositioning ourselves where everyone needs to now increase their capacity and become leader of themselves, as well as become support others who do not have or lacking have some weaknesses. And I think the collective way to go forward is best example and lessons I would say that we have to learn now and go forward with that. Thank you.
Thanks. I agree so much. And I wanted to kind of echo two things that you mentioned. The first was the kind of shared learning that can happen And I know I've seen you just talked about it. It's on an international level. That's kind of what your Global Sustainable Futures is. It's on that shared knowledge of networking, connecting. Because what I find even it's happening on a local level is that so many people are kind of working in silos in their projects. And a lot of that is because they don't have the capacity to start joining up and make something bigger themselves. And that works to everyone's detriment, because everyone has these great ideas and these great projects, but they find themselves working by themselves or in small areas and finding themselves quite limited. And that's from local, national, international level. That applies across the board. And then I feel like that's when you were talking kind of like when you're coming out of COVID, you got to have some sort of big plan, more of a big recovery plan. And that's kind of part of this idea of a green recovery, helping, building cities and building communities up to be more resilient to things that we'll end up facing because of the effects of climate change. So it ends up being like a program and a framework is much better and much more effective than having everyone work on silos, kind of chipping away at a much larger issue, which does require this big idea and this big framework of everyone working together. Does anyone have any more on that question? Anything they want to add?
Yeah, I'll take something quick. I agree with everything that's been said. I think it's important. I think that kind of something that keeps coming through is that sort of spirit of collaboration. I think the silos things, Cornell, is so spot on. And we still find that even though we're very good at identifying that, and we don't join up our thinking across sectors enough, we say it all the time, but we still don't do it. We're just talking about it so much. I think in terms of specifically to community level projects and lessons, every community is different, and only you will know what's sort of best for your community or what might work, what might not in your community. But I think just two quick things that I've found in this work, at least, is the first one is I find it helpful not to be overly prescriptive. So rather than going into a community and saying, hey, we've got this great energy project for you, or this is what your community needs, would you like us to do it? Much more kind of trying to work with communities to build something from the ground up. That tends to improve buy-in, in our experience at least, makes projects a little bit more sustainable, and you just get more people involved in them too. The second thing is that selling the opportunity, as well as the resilience aspect, as well as the climate aspect, and Dr. Thakor, the plain language, it's the communicating those ideas clearly is so important. You hear the science of it, as in the high level science, and people can switch off very quickly. But if you're willing to be patient and take the time to communicate these things, it's so powerful. But I think also selling the opportunity. So if you're talking about a local energy project that can generate clean electricity, but also create some jobs, then don't be afraid to be really upfront about that as well. It's a great opportunity. If you can create more green space in your area to make it, whether that's more resilient, to make it better prepped to pull carbon out of the air, or if it's for someplace for the community to gather, then sell that. That can be a really powerful thing as well. So yeah, building things collaboratively with communities, and also don't be afraid to be upfront about the other benefits of these projects too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. I feel like one of the big takeaways for what I've learned is to find out who's currently doing the same thing and just be open and talk to as many people as you can, because there's someone who has learned something along their journey for creating their own resilience projects, and they have so much knowledge to add to you, and there's so much collaborative opportunity there. And I think we've got quite a few questions. Thank you everyone for your questions. They're really good and they're very critical, and I'm very happy to answer all these with these two. The next one is a bit of a hard one, but I'm sure we've got lots to talk about, is what are the legislative limitations and challenges that you have faced during your initiatives? And I think I can start on a very broad note, where many of the resilience projects for people who are from underrepresented groups, the thing that they face the most is they don't have that kind of support and funding. They can only go so far in their projects to build resilience. They can only take what they have to build their own food production gardens, create their own food banks for the local communities. They can only go so far in their energy projects unless they receive that support. And that really does come from the very, very top and what policies are in place from governments. But I'm very interested to hear what Dr. Thakor and Fraser, you guys have to say.
I will tell from my experience that there are several legislations and law where you cannot keep pace with. But what I have found that they sometimes, of course, they are made to help the community, but they sometimes be a barrier as well to the community to engage and so on. So now, from my experience, I have not been talking about climate legislation and all that is talked about, but from my point of view, like experience of my organization, I started this organization for free, and then only people were able to join me. There was no restriction of the border, no restriction of any section, any society, and then only people were able to join me. And I'm very grateful to this IT system for now that it has allowed us to go and meet people, distance people, anytime, anywhere, and that sort of spirit we need to develop against any legislation or law. Or the otherwise, I would say the law and regulations must allow some sort of stability, but also allow flexibility. And that is not possible. These two things are so different. And so I think they can be as, but I would like to bring you to your knowledge one thing, that LSE, that is London School of Economics, has developed a very good database on climate laws and policies. They have developed, put 2,350 climate laws and policies, and that covers all the countries of the world, and there is an interactive map. And this would be useful for the community or anyone here in the audience to know that what an amazing work academia can do. And I think that is also our responsibility as an academia to provide this sort of information to the public and where they can take advantage of this. So this is just to give out a bit of information on that. Thank you.
Thanks, that's super useful. Fraser, did you want to add anything? Yeah.
I'll come in on one thing. So something that, and I imagine this is going to be common across European cities, and it's not something that we talk enough about in a city context, and that's land ownership. So when we're trying to put together community green spaces, solar projects, wind projects and stuff, land ownership in Scotland is famously terrible in general. It's so unequal, it's so monopolized by a very small number of people. But actually in most European cities, you have tons and tons of derelict land that is going to waste, but it's owned maybe by a private developer who won't give it up easily or won't give it up without a big payday. In fact, looking out the back window in my flat just now, I live in Cornell. I don't know how well you know, I live in Govan Hill, and I look out to a space in Govan Hill that was once a little industrial building. It then got knocked down. A private developer bought it to put flats up. They couldn't get permission to put flats up, wouldn't meet regulations. So the land's been sitting derelict for like 10 years. 3 times a local climate group has come and tried to build a community garden here. And 3 times the developer has come and bulldozed the community garden, just flattened it outright because they own the land. There's nothing to stop them doing that, even though this space is going to waste, even though it could be green space, it could be communal space, it could not just improve environmental credentials, but improve mental health and physical well-being and all that kind of stuff. So we have a big issue with land ownership and building ownership too. When you want to do a big community level project, whether that's tiny, whether that's large scale on public buildings or something, those ownership barriers are always there. To get around that, the Scottish Government is doing a lot to promote community interest, doing a lot to promote community buyouts. But again, that's kind of only really available to wealthier communities. So I think there's land specifically for trying to do, and that's not unique to Scotland, the UK, or even Europe. That's around the world. Land is a huge feature in this, and who owns land and what land gets used for is a consistent theme that we find for sure.
Thanks for that, Fraser. I think that's a very good point. Some of these barriers that you don't expect to see, they're not in your normal area of, like, you would think, barriers in limitations in energy or transport of things, but just these small parts, and especially in making a city and the smaller communities within those cities resilient. There's a lot of city planning laws, and I know so many people face that every day in their projects, that they aren't able to create, something for that community to create that resilience there. And it's legislation like that can really impede that action. And Fraser, we've got a question specifically for yourself. This question is talking about your project. Someone asks how are children involved, and can kids be involved in this kind of project?
They can be. So our Glasgow Community Energy is specifically on schools. We're not the only outfit that have done this in the world. There are a couple of different places that do this. In Spain, and I think it's Bilbao, they have it like on the local football stadium, and it serves the local community. It's incredible. But we do it on schools specifically, and part of the work that we do is outreach in schools. So we do climate education, energy education. We let the kids, mess around with, so all very safe, but mess around with solar panels and get things working. And the parents of those kids in the schools can become members of the Community Energy Project. So you have to be over 16, just legally we have to do that. But parents can invest or participate on behalf of their kids. And when their kids come of age, when they hit 16, then they automatically become members. So we can't involve them in the kind of decision-making side of it, sadly, but they have a voice through their parents or through teachers and representatives. And we made a point of writing into the sort of the legals that the kids who are involved in this automatically become members of the project, unless they, opt out. That's entirely fair too. So that we can promote the longevity of it, the sustainability of it, and so that they then have a say in their community, as it will be, in that few years down the line too. So they can be after a certain age, and we have sort of proxies in the meantime to try and make sure that they're represented as well.
Can I just add one thing? It's not around your project, but just involvement of kids in this type of work. I have a group of my academic group, like my coordinators from Turkey, and they have taken an initiative of educating kids for SDGs. And actually, one of my coordinator is the writer of these books, and they have developed a program, and they are now teaching in the schools, as well as they are training teachers to teach these activities. And so they take these examples and they teach and they involve interactive question answers to think, to make children think about what could be then alternative about if this is their problem. So I think you can also build on something like developing a book, and maybe that can be for the kids.
That's great. I think that's such a good point. I know there's so many different programs all around different European cities that will have something in terms of climate resilience and getting your community involved, that will have some sort of arm for kids to get involved. And it's really great to see kids get involved, because as soon as they get involved and they get very keen, then they start running with their own projects and then making their own effect, which is just fantastic to see. We'll go into our next question, which is, I'm going to do a little bit of a hard one. We'll try make this a very short answer, maybe limit it to 1 or 2 sentences. And the question is, what is the most crucial resource or support that is needed to enhance the benefits of community-based projects? And they say in terms of things like policy or finance or any other kind of area. If you could say one thing that would help, you would see that would really help your projects, or you would just see help in general in terms of resources and support for those projects, what would it be?
I think I've already mentioned education and capacity building, but capacity building can be wide area. But I think education, and partnerships, like forging partnerships. Those two would be the priority for me.
Yeah, I'd agree. I would think mine would be, because I know this is a lot of what I do with my work is creating a network of like-minded people on like-minded areas that they want to work on. And that goes back to our idea of making sure that people aren't working in silos. We're all working together and joining the information and the amount of power that we have together. Fraser, what would yours be?
Euros and cents. Euros and cents. Give people money. Give the groups that are in these communities asking you for money to do this kind of work, give them the money that they need. They will take a load of administrative work off your hands, a load of this sort of granular stuff that needs to be done. They can bring a ton of local knowledge and local capacity building, local partnerships into the project already. Just support them to professionalize so they don't have to volunteer and work 3 or 4 different jobs to make these things happen. Give the communities and the people working in them the money that they need to do these things, and they will do them.
Just to follow up on that one, Fraser, where do you think that money should come from? Should it be mostly government? Should it be a bit of share of businesses and different funders and things like that? What do you think is the most effective?
I think you can absolutely have a range of different ways of doing it. So Glasgow Community Energy runs as a cooperative, which actually means it's kind of an investment for the people who put money into it. So you can be like a company and invest in Glasgow Community Energy. You don't get a lot of money back because our money goes into the community, but you get a little bit back on your investment there. So there's scope for private finance. There's scope for green investment bonds and climate bonds and things like that too, where you have a sort of split of public-private finance coming into these projects. But I think first and foremost, fund it through government. I think we shy away from this conversation a lot of the time as if no, we can't possibly say that we need the government to spend money. No, fund it through government. We need to fund these things. The best way to deliver them is at the local level, so you can adjust them to people's needs as far as possible. That money needs to get spent, whether that's on a mass rollout of retrofit and renewables or on a local rollout of retrofit and renewables or green space or biodiversity protection, all that kind of stuff. It has to get funded one way or another. And if there are community groups or organizations at that level asking you for money to do it, divert some of that money to them to do it.
I also think private finance is also important here. People who are having a large organization or maybe any sort of profit that they could share or invest in such projects, then that would be really helpful. And I think there's a very big call for private investors to come here and reap the benefits.
So we've only got about 6 minutes left. We have a few more questions, but we'll see what we can do. Our next question is on what should EU governments be doing to build community resilience to climate change? And that is a quite broad question. We can tackle it in many ways, but I'm interested to see what people's perspective is on that one. Who would like to start?
Well, I can go.
Yeah.
We have already spoken many things like, education. I'm still on that education, that we have to create an environment where education flourishes about this climate change, its issues and challenges, and how we can address. Now, what I think that how we can build this education within the community, it is the responsibility of many groups here, academia, government, and industry, all of them, and they should take the leadership to come forward and to create an awareness within the community. I think we must build resilience at several levels. I mean, you have to approach a community because they are also at different levels, and we have to go across all these levels and make them aware what are their priorities, how they can adapt to the climate change, how they can change their perspective on this. And we must also because and especially I think the academia has a very big role to play here, because these elites, they are the elites, and they particularly are aware of these all impacts. They are aware that they are diverse and the impacts are long term, and there are so many uncertainties, and these all issues they must bring forward to the community to make them understand about the level of sensitivity, adaptive capacity, and there should be intensive training courses for such motivated leaders to go forward and go into community and talk to them. I'm surprised that when you two are there, you are a very good example of going to community, but I believe there are very, very less examples like this. And therefore, everyone must, how many times we have gone into community, like for academic, I'm asking them, how many times you have gone in the community and explained anything? You have went to conferences, written publications, but these are not for community. So you have to jump into the community, be part of the community to engage with them. Thank you.
Can I jump in with this one, Cornell? Is that okay? So I think, what was the original? Yeah, EU governance. So I think I would certainly echo Dr. Thakor. I think the education side of this is massive. The community engagement side of it is actual engagement is huge as well. I would say probably two sides of it. I'm not going to keep banging the give communities money drum. You know that I'm going to say it. Just take that as for granted just now. But on the other side of it, and I think it's remembering that communities don't operate in a vacuum, right? We're operating within towns, cities, countries, continents, within the planet. And I think the best way, there's a saying within energy policy that the most efficient energy is the energy that you don't use. And I think the most resilient communities are the communities who aren't actually put under pressure in the first place. So if you think about actually stopping the production and burning of fossil fuels, that's a very good way to make communities more resilient, because you're not then layering more and more pressure on through the actual climate crisis. And this is especially pertinent for the global south, for the countries most sharply affected. Now, obviously, a lot of that damage has been done. And now we're talking about not just mitigation, not just adaptation, but you're talking about damage that's already been done there. But in terms of resilience, the biggest thing that we can do is actually tackle the root of the problem, and that's the burning of fossil fuels. Besides that, I think it's largely a part of, obviously, listen to communities, engage with communities, give communities and the people who want to do the work the resources they need to do that work, and also very practically hire people from communities into your research, into your decision making, into your policy design. If you want to do something to help a specific community, you can't do that from a distance. So I think meet communities there, bring them into your spaces, but also don't be afraid to go into those spaces as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the hiring community members to be part of that planning process. I think there's a massive need for making sure that, like you said, Fraser, first and foremost is you just reduce carbon emissions, but then you've got to talk about how's that working within the cities around the EU. You have to look at a specific framework that governments need to be making. So that would be anything in energy and planning and transport. For example, if they're looking at transport, they've got to see that who is that bus service, that rail system owned by? Is it owned by a private business? What is that business being run like? Is it being run for private investments and for people to make money, or is it made for people to get around and for the environment? It's kind of reshaping the way that we think about planning and making policy in every area. Who is the benefit for? Are we making sure that we're including those who are the least underrepresented and making sure they have a seat at the table when we start planning for these policies, these frameworks that would include them on the resilience project? They will know what they need most. And exactly, I couldn't agree more on the pay these people. These people have the knowledge and they should be recognized for that. And that's a huge gap that we see I see it in a lot of cities around the EU today, and that was limiting us a lot in building resilience throughout our communities. So I was wrong before. We still have another half hour of answering questions, which is great because we have so much to talk about and so many other questions. So we'll smash on to our next one. This question is, urban and environmental planning systems can influence the distribution of land uses, including the location and design of infrastructure, including streets, landfills, housing, and parks, which can be critical for climate justice. What should local authorities be considering from a community resilience perspective? And I think I can start on this one by saying local authorities need to consider what the landscape is of their cities, who's living where, who is suffering the most from certain things, who is getting fuel poverty, who doesn't have a good source of food, who doesn't have just a general access to parks and environment which help for mental health and other well-being. Those are the things that need to be considered into the planning of where things go and the design behind them. I think it really should be people-led. And that's where you get the same thing as we were just talking about. You get the stakeholders from your community to tell you what they need, what's missing from their community, what will benefit those communities. You know, I know a lot of communities have benefited from projects where they have not just a park, but a park that also allows for people to have a space to gather that's safe, that has maybe some sort of stage or something, an environment, something where the community can gather around. Other areas where different, grassroots organizations or cafes or local businesses have, somewhere to congregate around. These are the things that need to start to be considered in quite of a broad prospect for local authorities. Wondering, Dr. Thakor or Stuart, do you have anything?
Yeah, yes, I think you are very right. And I will bring here my theoretical aspect here, like my perspective, which is systems thinking. I think we need to teach local authority decision makers systems thinking in the sense of bringing all the components together. And when I'm talking about components, as you mentioned in the examples, like spaces, buildings, what are the amenities you want, and so on. And these all elements of the planning impact on different social dimensions. Some impact on economic dimensions, some impact on social dimensions, some impact on environmental dimension. And we should be like the decision maker should be aware of these dimensions. And I think there are very good examples of planning frameworks nowadays developed, especially in UK, and I have seen in Russia that they incorporate, or you can say about, sustainability indexes which have been developed. Though they are not very common in all parts of the world, but they need to be learning from these things, that how they can incorporate these also aspects, different dimensions of sustainability. And also there is another perspective, theoretical perspective of it is like complex adaptive system, which comes from the organizational point of view. And I think they must be looking at these facilities like planning and other things which they are developed. They should be looking from the business perspective as well, but not as a profitable business, but as a sustainable business. And if they can bring all this together, then it is possible to engage with different sectors, relevant stakeholders, and move forward. Thank you.
So I think I've done my more work with local authorities than I ever hope to do in my life. And I'm sure I'm not done with them yet either. But I think for local authorities, the climate justice aspect is important, right? And I know when we talk about climate justice, we're typically talking about global climate justice, but you see the same patterns across European cities as well, right? So we know there was recent research in Scotland and the UK. We know that it's those lowest income households who are they're likely to be sited next to, busy roads or busy factories with high levels of air pollution, right? We know the kind of classic environmental justice elements of this as well. We know that lowest income families and communities are more likely to live in poorest quality housing, which have highest emissions, but also make them less resilient to climate impacts, things like flooding, extreme temperatures, all that kind of stuff as well. So we know that there's a big inequality in who experiences the impact around the world, but like we were saying before, within countries as well, and within European countries. But we also know, and try not to get too fired up here, but we also know that we're at a formative moment just now, right, where we're having to reimagine all of these things. We're having to reimagine infrastructure, streets, landfills. We're having to reimagine energy, housing, economic, land, jobs. Everything has to change to combat the climate crisis. With the right vision, with the right forethought from local authorities in particular, you can change those things in a way that has justice at heart. You can lift people out of poverty. You can alleviate inequality. You can retrofit and insulate the lowest income houses to bring down emissions from those houses, to make them more resilient, but also to bring down bills for people that desperately need it. You can create a more connected, expansive public transport network that's clean, that makes people think about leaving the car at home, but also that connects communities that are disconnected from green spaces or from, leisure and employment opportunities in general. So you have a massive opportunity to do really amazing stuff that actually, it sounds big, but doesn't have to cost the earth. A lot of it is within stuff that we need to do, we're planning to do, we're raising money to do already, whether that's local, national government, and local authorities will have a key role to play in this. They're playing a big role in the UK as well. You have this opportunity there if you're willing to build justice into your policy making and your decision making. Now, for the last 5, 6, for the last 30 years, for the last 50, 60 years, people have been talking about environmental and climate justice. We know where the issues are now. We know where the vulnerabilities are. And we know also where the opportunities now. Build that into your education, build that into your policy making, build it into KPIs, into your decision-making processes. And really, it doesn't have to take a whole lot more work than that. Add that into proper engagement, add that into properly thinking about what you need in your communities and your cities for proper resilience. And you can actually not just mitigate the worst impacts, but create something really, really special for going forward too. Sorry, I got a bit carried away.
That's all right. We're all very passionate about this project in our own way. And
I can just bring a practical example
Yeah,
here.
go ahead.
If anyone has been to Poundbury. Okay, Poundbury, yeah, Cornwall. It is a project, or you can say a location which has been, the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles has adopted it. He's a patron of that locality. And what they have done, they have increased all the streets and other things which are walkable. So the whole area is walkable. They have developed all the shops and other things in concern, like in engaging with the community, and it has been flourished so much. Though there are changes in the shops, but they make sure that the changes are sustainable in the sense of whoever takes the shop, they make sure that he will be getting the business. They support them so much to uplift his ability to do business and so on. And there is a mixed locality. And these are the things I think are very much needed to be inbuilt within the planning framework. Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that one, I think in Scotland, we have an example which is proposed within policy, which is the idea of 20-minute neighborhoods. Sure, you guys have heard of that, where the idea is to build these neighborhoods around the idea of community resilience. And so that people won't need to travel so far for all their needs. And so you take away that carbon emission cost of simply traveling, and then they have all these other resources around this kind of pocket area. which would allow for improving the local livability and well-being of those areas, rather than just kind of, building one major city center up to be, and then letting the rest degrade and be deprived. So I think that's a very good point. We have another one here, which is the question from Motez. Thanks. Is there any international system or framework that can be used to finance and deliver resilience interventions at different scales? And I think that's a very interesting question. And the only thing I can comment on is at the most global scale at COP26, and beforehand they made the agreement for 100 billion, I think it's dollars, pounds, I can't remember, to finance adaptation and loss due to climate change. But it's a very good question to see what is being done, or is there something in terms of a framework done at different scales?
I don't have particular idea, but I have read about co-sharing in the sense of, you input just like cooperative, but it was slightly different, model, where initially you put in your pot 3,000 pounds or something, but you keep on adding to the pot and then lending to people who need. Especially creating a bank for micro people, it's called micro bank, I think, yes. And that reminds me of micro bank, and it dispersed to farmers and other things. And that is an example coming from Brazil. So I have just read something about it, but I don't remember the details of it. So I think micro banks and other things, there are several models coming up, but the unfortunate thing is that they do not go internationally. That's the basic barrier to us. Whoever wants to go internationally, they ask for high investment. I have got a request from, it was a random request. I was not interested also, but I read through it. And it said that we would be very happy to invest in your network, but only if you are making 75,000 turnover per year. So these are the barriers for investment. They want that something is already there to establish that they will be still profiting. So they are talking about their profit when they are investing. They are not talking about any sustainability or green thing. And that is the dilemma of this finance sector.
Yeah, it's a very difficult one. Fraser, what do you think?
Yeah, so I don't have anything to point to, like, here's a global outfit that'll just give you money to do stuff. That would be nice. I think, so thinking a couple of different things, I guess. The first one is that there are ways that if you were someone who had money to invest, you could finance different things. Now you're talking much more private or much more cooperative as well. So a lot of the cooperative movement in Europe that do community-based stuff, led by an organization called ResScoop, RESCOOP. You can invest anywhere in Europe, or if, your company, your firm, or whatever wants to invest and help a project somewhere else, you can do that too. I get the impression that's not necessarily the question that you're asking, much more about a kind of an international or a global framework that we can do. That kind of thing, to my knowledge, doesn't exist at this time. What we're talking about there, I guess, and this feeds off the back of what Dr. Thakur says, is that you kind of need to change the incentive for investment away from, so think about, why do we invest? Why do people invest? What's the economic goal, or what are the outcomes that we're seeking as investors? Is shifting the institutional incentives much more towards social and environmental good. And that comes with things like, if you want to talk about, new ideas around a well-being economy, moving away from GDP and growth and return on investment into these different ideas of social and environmental good. This is a much bigger thing. This is a long-term thing. You're talking about systems change. But thinking about what economics is for, who it's for, what finance is for, and who that's for, is something that I think, and this ties into, I can see another question that's come up here. this kind of ties into that. At COP, we're going to be talking about different ways to stimulate finance in social and environmental goods rather than just finance for the return on investment. So no, very short way of saying it is no, that there's no current international system or framework. There are different means for private investors or even public investors, but it might be something that we see raised over the next month at COP.
I absolutely think that question has really highlighted the lack of that need. And I'm not sure how many people have heard of the Climate Change Advisory Group. It's quite new. A group, basically, think of what has come out of COVID-19, and you've got an international advisory group giving advice to all governments and all public bodies on how to handle that. And this is basically the equivalent of that for climate change. It's scientists, professionals and experts from all different areas. And one of the things they mentioned that needs to be done in the future is that investment into countries in the global south needs to be incentivized from countries in the global north. So, for example, you would take the US, for example, and they invest into different coal projects and different fossil fuel projects in Africa, and while at the same time touting that they're doing their own climate action. But what's that doing for those countries there? That's just going to worsen the effects of climate change themselves and not really going to help them build the sustainable economy that they need. So we're going to have to start investing and creating incentives for those investments to build those kind of all the infrastructure that's needed there. So, for example, many African countries are not really equipped for these hazards, and many of their economies are built solely on agriculture. What happens when climate change comes along and you see hazards affect that main source of money for these countries? Then they're going to start toppling down. They don't build resilience. So absolutely, with that question, say there needs to be a system so that these countries build sustainably and are invested in throughout the world. And then that in turn reduces emissions, gets people away from investing in fossil fuels in these countries, and then also betters them because it works towards their own sustainable development.
Yeah, I think, adding that in, that's such a huge thing, is that idea that, that creative carbon accounting, where you say, no, we're clean, but, everything we import or manufacture abroad or whatever it might be. The one last thing that I would add to that as well, while we're talking about the global inequality issue, is not just disincentivizing investment in dirtier industries in other countries, but also I would go all out and say forgiving international debt to allow countries to bypass the need for coal or oil or fossil fuels and move into that kind of cleaner, renewable opportunity that they have that maybe isn't quite as affordable just now. Yeah, putting money straight back into, or at least giving people a much better fighting chance from the start point that they have just now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And okay,
sorry, go ahead.
And when we are talking about addressing climate related problems, and I just remind of this Kiribati, which is going to it has been announced that this country will get it to will be drowned in 50 years time. It will be nowhere, land will not remain there. And I always I have read about that president Anote Tong, and I worried. He did several things about this addressing climate change, and he is actually called as to raise global awareness of the threat posed by the climate change, and he was also a nominee, 2 times nominee for Nobel Prize. And he thinks that whatever comes with the climate change, it is something so drastic that when the people have to displacement occurs due to that climate change, I think migration should be with dignity. So he preached that concept that anything we have to do with climate justice or people who have been suffered from climate problem, then they should be treated as with dignity. And this is very important message from him, that we must not leave them as a refugee, and we have to respect their dignity. And what he did, that he made his island and living lab of all the things. Like he tested agriculture, which agriculture can like what type of crop can be survived in this type of salty water and so on. He did all sort of things, and he made quite interesting progress also, but still, and he also bought a land in Fiji to displace his people. And what he asked New Zealand and Fiji and other Australia, that whoever migrates from here, they have to train them for 35 years, train them, and they can come back and get their family, and also train people over here at their own place. And if they go back, they should be allowed at least 35 years to accommodate within this. So there are several problems of such things when it comes to climate justice and climate migration and so on.
Yeah, this question and all these answers really tie into the next question as well, which is what areas and issues should be addressed by COP26 to improve city resilience and climate justice, which I know there are many different areas, but I think for myself, it would be the fact that there is this an ongoing kind of topic that we've been talking through, is what are your systems built for? What's your energy system built for? What's your transport system built for? Who's profiting from these things? Is it the people who are in the city who will suffer the effects from climate change, which will kind of rock these systems? And are the people who rely on them going to suffer from that? Or are these systems going to be built for people with the idea that, investment isn't, all the money that's coming from that isn't going elsewhere and not to those cities? Making sure that these systems are really built for people first, I think, is one of the key things that needs to be done. And that really feeds into every single part of how we create a framework for tackling climate change and within a city and making sure that we're resilient.
I believe, again, the planning is the foremost priority, because that sector can incorporate communities, their needs, how they, because planning is a long-term strategy anyway, like long-term thinking anyway, and we can accommodate all sort of sectors that where we will put our economy, concentrate on economy, where we can bring education and all sort of those things like it. So planning, I believe that we must start with planning and then go forward with other areas to accommodate within them.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't think I can add anything huge to that. I think that the last thing probably that I would say is, when we talk about, and I mentioned it in that previous answer, we talk about improving resilience, improving climate justice, the best thing we can do about any of that is to reduce emissions, right? Like large scale, accept that we have to do it, and do that at the quickest, at the source, as far as feasible. But in terms of for improving city resilience, I think it's appreciating that local people understand what they need better than high level intergovernmental sort of dignitaries or delegates, as important as the high level stuff is. I think it's building in that different communities will require different things. They'll also have different opportunities and different needs in terms of resilience. So doing what we can to not necessarily legislate, but to try and write in something around, or discuss more or promote more this idea that Dr. Thakur kept coming back to around engagement. I think is the big thing, is making sure that you're engaging people in this process as far as possible, because you need this to be long term. You need it to be large scale, and that actually starts on the smallest scale possible. So yeah, trying to do what we can around this engagement, trying to do what we can around the opportunity as well, working out who and what we're doing any of this stuff, or what we're planning for, what we're building for. And yeah, I think just making sure that justice is at the heart. This sounds like a very fluffy answer, but I think something that we haven't ever done is put justice at the heart of decision making. And I don't mean thinking about justice as we make decisions. I mean formalizing it, putting it into our different performance indicators and the different measurements we use to gauge success when we're designing, whether that's at the city level, community level, international level, is actually building it into our processes. So I think this is something that we can do that can filter down at multiple scales to really promote climate justice and resilience more broadly.
Yeah, you say it's flowery, but I have a really good case study example for that sort of thing where I think at COP, they really, there's a lot of civil society organizations that are there, and they have a wealth of knowledge to share with these delegates and international representatives of all these governments. And there's so much you can gain from listening and providing a space for these people and joining resources with them. For example, my hometown where I grew up is in Canberra in Australia, and in that space, they went from having a very, very low number of COVID vaccinations and now almost to being one of the most vaccinated places in the world. And the reason that they were able to achieve that is, yes, they had a decent program created by government, but what happens in every other city is that there's groups that have missed, and because these systems aren't made for all these people. So there were a lot of grassroots organizations making sure that migrant groups, refugee groups for their areas of greater deprivation than other places, making sure that they weren't missed. And those civil society groups that made sure that didn't happen. And then that's how they achieved such a great thing in conjunction with the government. And I think very much so the same thing can be applied when you're looking at big issues around climate change and COP and how to improve cities' resilience. You've got to make sure that you really utilize that fantastic resource that's there, which is, again, that is the people. Those are the civil society is a massive part of it. And there is a wealth of knowledge that can be gained there. And it's just a matter of making sure that they're engaged, that they're at the table for each sort of plan. And I think out of all the questions we had today, I think that is one of the driving points. Make sure you're collaborating with everyone. Everyone has a good idea. We're all facing this issue together. We all are here to try and make these communities resilient, make our own cities the most resilient as possible, because in the end, we face the challenges of climate change. Eventually, each of us is going to see an effect on our personal lives and in our communities. And the more we can do now, the best we can have for later in life. And I think that's a great way we can wrap up the session. Thank you again, Fraser, Stuart, and Dr. Renuka Thakur. I'm Cornell Hangsonford. Thanks everyone for stopping by and listening to this session on community resilience in the face of climate change. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I'm getting told we want to get a group photo of everyone here who's involved.
Yeah, but how can we do this? EVA team, do you have any mechanism or anything to help with
I can
this?
take that. If you just open your videos, I will take a screenshot.
But
and
there
then
are
send
other
you-
participants, like 17
I
participants.
think maybe it's just a group photo of us.
Okay,
No,
All of us
only
here.
our group photo. We cannot take participants group.
okay. John,
I've
are you
already
there?
taken one, but I can take this one. So yes. And I will send you in through email then. Is every tech team 6 is also available? Should I just take it like that, like this?
Yeah, that should be fine.
Okay. All right. Smile. Yes, I have taken.
Great, fantastic.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was
Yeah,
really
thank you
engaging,
everyone for
the session.
participating.
guys.
That was great.
Bye-bye.
It was great meeting you, Faisal, and all.
You too. We'll hopefully keep in touch.
Keep in touch.
Good to meet you.